I hear a bulldog good morning on 3. Ready? Can you do it?
Yes!
1, 2, 3.
Good morning!
All right. My next job is to introduce Mrs. Rush so that she can start us with the program. But what I would love very much to happen is those ambassadors, those donors that helped us with the project, would you please come on stage with me? And I'm even including the newest member of our community, the new gold child. Come on. Come on up, donors.
So why did the M&M have to go to summer school? Because he wants to be a smarty. Today's a really special day here at Ponte Vedra. It is our ceremonial groundbreaking, and it wouldn't happen without our generous donors. So I would like to read a list of the donors who have been instrumental in this very amazing day. Jack C. Arnold Jr. Charitable Fund, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Baum, the Bolles School Parent Association, Dr. Jose Diaz Gomez and Dr. Isabel Mira, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Drum, Mr. and Mrs. Stephen Fisher, Mr. Stephen Gold and Dr. Catherine Gold, Mr. and Mrs. Gregory Jones, Mr. Richard Laws, Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Levinson, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Lenegro, Mr. and Mrs. Douglas McNeil, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey McNeil, Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Merritt, Mr. and Mrs. George Mobley, Mr. and Mrs. David Moffett, Mr. Ronald Lynn, Ellen and Greg Rogowski, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Ruger, Dr. and Mrs. Shady, Dr. James Stamen and Mrs. Teresa Bennett, Mrs. Catherine Stupsky, Mr. Eric Stupsky, Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth Toning Jr., Dr. Carrie Von Goben and Mr. Rick Von Goben, Mr. and Mrs. Seth Waller, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Walsh, Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Wotus. And special thanks to those who have hosted events at their home and helped in our outreach. Me, but thanks. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Delaney, Mr. and Mr. Stephen Gold and Dr. Catherine Gold, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Hodge, Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Lockett, Mr. and Mrs. Rodney McLaughlin, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey McNeil, Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Scott, Mrs. Catherine Stupsky, and of course Carl. Thank you. Let's have a round of applause for them all.
I just have a few brief remarks. It was a gym, she thought, that would bring joy to future Bolles students over the years. This inspirational quote came from the first donor, a teacher at Bolles for more than a decade, Mrs. Kathy Stupsky. It was a little more than a year ago she gave an amazing leave gift to make this facility happen. Today, we are seeing her compassion and generosity become a reality. Not only did she come forward to give such a thoughtful gift to the school in memory of her husband, Carl, but through her unselfish act of kindness, she sparked an energy and a passion in others to step forward and give as well. We want to thank the generous donors who joined Mrs. Stupsky in making this project come to life, but students, I want you to listen to this closely. Mrs. Stupsky is an example to all of us about the importance of caring for others. She made a big difference in our school community because of her generosity. Giving back and caring is something each and every one of you can do while you're here on this campus, but also when you're a grown-up. You also can make a difference. Mrs. Stupsky, in honor of your dedication to the school and to this project, I'd like to present you right now with this bouquet of flowers. Okay, I need our bucketeers to take their places. All right, are you ready? I need to hear a lot of volume. Ready?
5, 4,